What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Appreciate you joining me today. I'm going to be going over the Packers' undrafted free agents today and tomorrow, unless something super crazy happens that I can't talk about it tomorrow. But I'm going to talk about the offense today. I'm going to talk about the defense tomorrow. Clearly, because there's 7 players I'm going to be going over on each day, I'm not going to be able to do deep dives in all these players, but I want to give you a handful of things that I liked, a handful of things that I didn't like, so you kind of get a general idea of some of these players at least, because as we know, it's very likely that 1 or 2 of these players will actually make the roster on the 53, if not to open the season, even still at some point during the season. So want to always break down these players. It's actually one of my more favorite things to do through the course of the year and all the different things that I do, because we get through all the rookies, right? We get through the draft, all these players that get their names called, but there's always about 15, maybe even more guys that end up on the roster, to begin with as undrafted free agents. And as I mentioned, Green Bay is one of the biggest and best teams at finding undrafted free agents and making them into players who make the 53-man roster. So always a fun process for me. But before we get there, the Packers actually added another undrafted free agent rookie on Tuesday. They added long snapper Jack Coco. You heard that right. Jack Coco, a rookie long snapper out of Georgia Tech. He did play some tight end as well. Out of everything that I do for breaking down the Packers, one of my things that I refuse to do is break down long snapper tape or review any sort of snaps for long snappers. I just can't bring myself to do it. I can confirm that he did, in fact, snaps for kickers and punters at Georgia Tech. That's all I got for you, but he will be competition for Steven Wirtel. And again, they did add him as an undrafted free agent rookie. And again, he will compete with Wirtel for that long snapper position. There was one other news and note from Tuesday. The Packers released one of their other undrafted free agents, rookie Jameer Johnson, who was a rookie offensive lineman out of Texas A&M. Did I break down all of his tape just yesterday so that I could give you guys some news and notes and information on Jameer Johnson? I did. Was I frustrated that a day later Jameer Johnson was released? So I have all of these notes right in front of me on Jameer Johnson that will never see the light of day. I am a little bit disappointed and frustrated in that, but more importantly, best of luck to Jameer Johnson. He was waived injured by the Packers, and one of the most brutal things that you can have as a undrafted free agent rookie is any sort of injury, right? You're so behind the 8 ball as an undrafted free agent as it is, that any injury from the time that you are basically picked up as an undrafted free agent through training camp is almost just like a death sentence to your your opportunity as a player. You're so just pressed to impress the team from day one up until the point where final roster cuts take place, that if you have any injury and any setback, it's just brutal to try to overcome it. So best of luck to Jameer Johnson moving forward. He was a 24-year-old, 6'4", 290 offensive tackle out of Texas A&M, redshirt senior, but he will have to try to make do and get over his injury and move on. But Packers released him with a injury on Tuesday, and he will no longer be on the Packers roster. So let's get to the remaining 6 undrafted free agents on the offensive side of the ball. Again, I'm going to go over about 3 to 4 things that I really liked, 3 to 4 things that they need to work on, and then at the end, I'll give you the 3 players that I think have the best chance of maybe navigating their way onto the roster, and the 3 players that I like the most. So first player up that we're going to discuss is BJ Baylor, who is a running back out of Oregon State. RAS was 6.1, so 61st percentile athlete at the running back position. He will turn 24 in September, redshirt senior, 5'10", 202. My positive notes: he's a one-cut zone running game running back. I think he fits very well with what Green Bay will want to do in a zone blocking scheme. One cut, no nonsense, up the field, vertical runner. Not going to spend a ton of time cutting horizontally and going sideline to sideline. The thing that I like is that he plants his foot and gets upfield. Runs behind his pads and is more physical than his size and bench press would lead you to believe. Had a horrible bench press, is a little bit undersized at 5'10", 202, but he runs behind his pads well, and like I mentioned, is a more physical running back than you would expect given his profile. North-south runner with very good vision. And what you want to see out of like an undrafted free agent running back is like one trait that's maybe going to get them or like be special enough to get them on the roster, right? I thought he had really good vision when he's decisive, when he is a one cut runner, when there's not a lot of, sideline to sideline and he makes that decision. That's where you see that vision come in. He's not going to be somebody that makes a ton of people miss in the open field, but good vision, running behind your pads. He has an effective stiff arm. Those are sort of things that can potentially give him a chance at the next level. And the other thing that I really liked is he only played 710 total snaps, which is not great because you want some of that experience, right? But the thing I do love, he has only 318 total carries from college on his body. So you talk about a running back position that in college you're basically starting the clock for the wear and tear for a position that just wears down very quickly. He only has 318 total carries on his body. And think of it this way, right? Like even if BJ Baylor makes it onto the team, you're probably looking at him as your number 3 or number 4 running back. It's not like all of a sudden he's going to have a ton of carries this year, probably even next year. You're probably looking at him 3 years down the road before you get any sort of real wear and tear. So he will have a ton of tread on the tires and should have very active legs because he just hasn't had a ton of carries in college. Now, on the flip side, only 16 career receptions. He had 4 fumbles this past season, which is a huge red flag. His pass pro is a work in progress, to say the least. And he's mostly I'm going to get what's blocked for me sort of back. So love the fact that he's a scheme fit, like that he's a north-south runner, that he'll plant his foot and get vertical. And again, he shows a couple things, vision, stiff arm, over like scheme fit that could potentially lead him to a spot on the roster, but he's going to have to just gain some experience, become a better pass catcher, and clean up that fumble issue, to say the least. All right, next up is Danny Davis. He is a 6'1", 188-pound wide receiver out of Wisconsin, redshirt senior, a RAS score of only 2.46, so only the 24th percentile for wide receivers. Could not find his age, so apologize for that. I looked everywhere, but wasn't able to find it anywhere. Even on Packers.com, they didn't have it. So positives, he has some legit toe drag swag. There were multiple catches on tape where he was able to get both of his feet just barely in bounds, but made some pretty ridiculous catches. Has some strong hands. As I mentioned, came up with some spectacular catches. Only 2 drops since 2019, so pretty sure-handed. He's a more than willing blocker. He's not the most physical guy in the world, but as you can imagine, playing at Wisconsin in a run-heavy offense, you have to be a willing blocker, and Davis was definitely that. Had immediate production as a freshman. Part of the issues with Davis is he just fought through inconsistent quarterback play, which most Packer/Badger fans will know. I think he is actually a better wide receiver than he got credit for because, again, just the inconsistencies at quarterback. And I would put him as an above average route runner. Do think that he has the ability to separate a little bit. His physical limitations are going to hold him back, but if your physical limitations aren't there, you have to win as a route runner, and I think Danny Davis can do that. The bad news for Davis, or the downside, doesn't have that high-end athleticism, and he's never going to be a high-end playmaker. He's not a yards after catch threat, never had more than 128 yards after the catch in any season in college. He never had a 100-yard game in his career. He's an incredibly limited when it comes to special teams experience, barely played special teams, and I would also argue he has extremely limited upside as well. So he's going to have to find a way to just become a really nuanced route runner and win with that because he's never going to win with pure athleticism. And the fact that he's never going to be a playmaker, hasn't had the yards after catch ability, is just going to limit his upside as a wide receiver. But there are some things to like with Danny Davis. Next up was sort of the gem of the Packers undrafted free agent class, Tyler Goodson, RAS score of 9.53, so 95th percentile athlete at running back, will only turn 22 in November, so still only 21 years old. A lot of developmental upside still there. Was a junior, 5'9", 197, so a bit undersized, out of the University of Iowa. Tested as an incredible athlete despite being undersized, so as I mentioned, 95th percentile athlete. He was asked to pass block at Iowa, was asked to do a little bit of everything. Catch the ball to the backfield, be obviously a pure running back, pass protect, and then he also did some wildcat stuff. So there was some versatility to his game. Now, his pass blocking was a roller coaster of good, bad, ugly, indifferent. Like there was everything. You want to see some good pass pro on tape? Tyler Goodson has it. You want to see some ugly pass pro on tape? Tyler Goodson has it. You want to see a little bit in the middle? Tyler Goodson has it. So you didn't know what you were going to get. He's going to have to clear that up. But A lot of running backs in college aren't even asked to do that. Goodson was asked to do it on numerous occasions, so at least he has some experience with it. Has reliable hands and could even line up in the slot a little bit. They used him a little bit as a gadget type weapon and somebody who can line up almost as a pseudo wide receiver. He ran the zone scheme at Iowa and, as I mentioned, was asked to run, was asked to catch, was asked to pass pro, did some wildcats, so did a variety of different things. And he led Iowa in rushing for 3 straight seasons and had more yards in the Big Ten, more yards rushing in the Big Ten than any running back over the past 3 seasons combined. So there's some definite productivity there. On the flip side, the high-end athleticism to me just never really showed up on tape. I talk about it all the time of sometimes you get these high-end athletes that don't look like high-end athletes on tape, or you look at these low-end athletes that look much quicker, much more spry, much more athletic on tape. Unfortunately for me, Goodson tested through the roof, but it never really showed out completely at Iowa. I question his vision as a runner, needs to do a much better job of running behind his pads. He's much too reliant on speed in the open field, doesn't really have any sort of move set, not going to juke people out, doesn't really have a stiff arm. Like, he needs to develop something in the open field where he can, gain that extra yardage, right? Because think of it this way, right? The offensive line may get you to the second level, but there's always going to be a safety or a linebacker waiting for you. Like, what are you going to do to separate from that player, right? You need some sort of move, some juke, some spin, some stiff arm. Didn't really see that out of Goodson. He used his speed, which is good, but he was a little bit too reliant on that. And he has very limited special teams experience as well. So that is the good, the bad, and the ugly from Tyler Goodson. Next up is Caleb Jones, an offensive tackle out of Indiana. A mammoth human being, 6'9", 370. RAS score of only 1.89, so 18th percentile athlete at offensive tackle, 23 years old. As mentioned, as a pro, he is a massive, massive human being. It's like trying to rush around a house. You're just not used to seeing a player this size, this wide, this long at the position, right? And if you're an edge coming off, you just got to, almost like go a little bit further out to try to get around from him. Now, his foot quickness and like those sort of things are definitely an issue, but if you're like trying to go for like the quickest point from point A to point B, well, you don't really want to try to go through a 6'9", 370-pound player. So you have to take a little bit of a longer, rush angle to get around him, which again gives your quarterback a little bit more time. So massive mammoth human being, has experience at both left tackle and right tackle, started 31 games in college at Indiana, and he's basically a unique flavor of offensive lineman that they don't really have on their roster, right? You're thinking of this zone blocking scheme, all of these quicker, more agile offensive tackles. Well, Caleb Jones isn't that, and they don't have that guy on the roster. So he's a little bit of a different flavor of something that they frankly just don't have. And I do think sometimes, right, you get into this idea of, well, every offensive lineman has to fit in this box. Or you might be like, well, these 6'9", 370-pound offensive linemen haven't worked in the past. Well, sometimes you get in that mindset. Well, you give a guy like that a chance, or you give him a specific job and maybe he can excel. A part of me wants to see him as like a 6th offensive tackle, like almost as like a Mercedes Lewis type player, right? I'm not saying he can play tight end. I'm not saying that at all. But like, if you're bringing in a 6th offensive lineman, I could think of very few people who could be as intimidating in that situation as a 6'9", 370-pound offensive tackle. So maybe they can find a specific role for him, but they just don't have that player on their roster. So at least it's a unique flavor that they don't currently have. Now, some really bad tape, right? Horrible balance. His anchor is questionable. He has a poor center of gravity. Doesn't fit their scheme at all. I really question why they maybe even wanted to bring him in. He has no positional versatility. He's probably a right tackle only. Doesn't play up to his size. He's not the physical, mauling, intimidating player that you would hope from a 6'9", 370-pound player. Doesn't have play speed or agility. He's far too susceptible to speed moves and inside moves. He can get beat on both, and his technique is just a mess. So nice that they bring in this mammoth human being that they don't really have a carbon copy of on their roster, but he needs a lot of work as an offensive lineman. All right, next up is another offensive lineman, George Moore. He is a 313-pound offensive lineman out of Oregon, played tackle, played some guard, probably Probably going to be a guard at the NFL level. RAS score of 5.37, so 53rd percentile athlete. Redshirt senior, 6'6", again, 313 pounds. And I believe, I could only find it one place, so I couldn't verify it, but I believe he's 26 years old in July. So if that's the case, definitely overaged. As a plus side, he's played left tackle, left guard, and right tackle. He's played 1,143 snaps and has multiple starts for a major college program at Oregon, including at left tackle, arguably the most important position along the offensive line. He profiles for me as a zone blocking left guard and fits what Green Bay wants at that position. Plays with good pad level and a little bit of nasty. And he has some upside and potential with enough speed and agility to get to the second level that I can see an avenue here for maybe like a backup caliber offensive lineman. Now, on the flip side, struggles with inside pass rushes. He's going to definitely need some time to add functional strength in the weight room. Potentially overaged if the age is correct, if he does turn 26 in July. He's very inconsistent, lacks in technique, not a high-end athlete, and often loses the leverage battle, and opponents just shed his blocks way too easily. So definitely a work in progress, and if he's 26, that really limits his upside. But I do see some traits there that I like and do think he could work himself into a backup, rotational offensive lineman role, but he has work to do to get to that point. And then last but not least is Cole Schneider. He is a center out of the University of Central Florida, played guard, played center. He had a RAS score of 6.80, so 68th percentile athlete at center. He will turn 24 in August. He is a senior, 6'3", 309. Primarily played left guard at UCF, but had 137 snaps at center and 305 snaps at right guard. Primarily left guard, but 4-year starter at UCF with 3,186 snaps at both, again, left guard, center, and right guard combined, primarily at left guard. The biggest thing with Cole Schneider, the biggest, most impressive thing, only 3 pressures this past season in 2021 as a starter and 444 pass pro snaps. In fact, Pro Football Focus had him as their most efficient offensive lineman in pass protection this past season, again, with only 3 pressures allowed. I'm not talking 3 sacks allowed, 3 total pressures, which is an incredible number for playing at a program like UCF. To me, he fits the profile of zone blocking center, looks the part, has a really nice frame, plays through the whistle, plays smart, also has a bit of nasty to him. And while his agility numbers were really bad, he's agile enough to get to the outside and get to the second level as a center. I'm not super concerned about his low agility scores. I think he can do just enough to get by at that position. From a downside standpoint, falls off of blocks way too easily, needs to play more upright and not get bent over, bends at the waist a little bit, ducks his head too often. I do question how we do against top tier talent. Now, we're talking about an undrafted free agent, right? So like this might sound a little bit ridiculous, but I'm thinking like an Akeem Hicks in his prime. I'm like thinking of that player against a Cole Schneider, and I have some real concerns how he would hold up in that type of situation, which most undrafted free agent rookies are not going to hold up well in that situation. But I do believe that he's going to have to put a lot of work in, some on the weight room, but more on his technique and his hand usage before he's going to be able to hold up against players like that. I was always left wanting a little bit more when I was watching him. I felt like he could have been a little bit more dominant. Now, that might sound ridiculous considering he only gave up 3 pressures this past season, but I just felt overall from a technique and just consistency standpoint that he could have done better. I thought all the traits were there for him to be a really good guard / center, and it just fell apart at times. So I want him to be a bit more consistent, and I felt he could play with a little bit better balance as well. So that's something that he's definitely going to have to work on. Overall, my top 3 on the offensive side of the ball were Cole Schneider, BJ Baylor, and Tyler Goodson. Those are the 3 that I think have a potential avenue to making this team either as a top practice squad player or maybe even sneaking onto the 53. When you talk about avenues to the 53 with Baylor and Goodson, you look at the running back depth chart, right? Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, Patrick Taylor, Kylan Hill. Those are the only 4 ahead of him. And we know Jones and Dillon are going to make the roster. Kylan Hill is almost assuredly going to start on the PUP list. So the only player that either of these players have to beat out besides each other is Patrick Taylor, who is an undrafted free agent himself. And while I really like Patrick Taylor, it's not like he has this surefire, 100% set 53-man roster spot, right? So there is an avenue for either of these guys if they ball out and just beat Patrick Taylor that they can make the roster. Meanwhile, if there's any injury at all to either Jones, Dillon, or Taylor, like they probably inherently keep one of these two guys, right? Either Baylor or Goodson, and maybe they add a player, so it's not like a foregone conclusion, but there's a real opportunity, an avenue for one of those players to make the team. And moreover, it's not impossible, and it's been done where teams keep 4 running backs like a decent amount of times, right? So if Green Bay decides that they really like one of these guys, it's not impossible to just keep 4 running backs either with Jones, Dillon, Taylor, and either Baylor or Goodson. So I think both of them have a real opportunity if they can play well. And then the other player, Cole Schneider, the center position's a little bit tough. Like Josh Myers isn't going anywhere, but like Jake Hanson's been cut in the past already. I think he's got a spot on this 53. I'm not going to say locked down, but I think he has a spot. But like Michael Manet, I don't know if it's Manette or Manet. I don't know if it's French. Sorry, Michael Manette. But like, he's no guarantee to make the roster. Hanson could, you could just slide him to guard and Schneider could be the center, right? Like, so like Lucas Patrick's gone. I do think there's an avenue for Schneider to make this team as a 53-man roster contributor as well. So not maybe likely. I think it's more likely practice squad, but certainly not impossible either. So top 3, Cole Schneider, BJ Baylor, and Tyler Goodson. And I do think all 3 have at least practice squad shots, if not a outside chance at the 53-man roster. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate it. I believe I'll be right back here tomorrow with the defensive side of the undrafted free agents. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.